This Athletic podcast is sponsored by Shopify. Now, when you think about companies like Skims or Allbirds, they are selling through the roof. Sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand and brilliant marketing, but often the overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business, which makes buying and selling simple. And for millions of businesses, that business is Shopify, because nobody does selling better than Shopify. It's the home of the #1 checkout on the planet, and the not-so-secret secret with ShopPay, it boosts conversions by up to 50%. So if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell while your customers are scrolling or strolling on the web or in your store, in their feed and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more on Shopify. So upgrade your business to get the same checkouts used by Skims and Allbirds. Sign up right now for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/theathletic, all in lowercase and with no spaces. Upgrade your selling today at shopify.com/theathletic. That's shopify.com/theathletic.
As you've probably heard by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code THEATHLETIC, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code THEATHLETIC. Make your first deposit of at least $10. Place your first bet on any game and claim your voucher for a 1-year subscription to The Athletic. See BetMGM.com for terms. U.S. promotional offers not available in D.C., Mississippi, New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona. 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts. 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. 1-800-270-7117 for confidential help in Michigan. 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only in partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code THEATHLETIC and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager.
Halliday presents, in the red corner, the undisputed, undefeated Weed Whacker Guy. Champion of hurling grass and pollen everywhere. And in the blue corner, the challenger, extra strength, Halliday. Eye drops that work all day to prevent the release of histamines that cause itchy allergy eyes. And the winner by knockout is Halliday. Halliday, bring it on.
The Athletic.
The race is on, and Oscar Piastri took his second victory of the season in Bahrain as Max Verstappen managed only 6th after the high of Suzuka. So what caused Red Bull's slump in form, and why could Lando Norris only manage 4th while his teammate led from the front? I'm Edd Straw, and joining me to tell all are Mark Hughes and Jon Noble. Well, Jon, I'll say hello to you first, as if we haven't been here for the whole week together, but it's been a fun weekend, hasn't it?
Yeah, quite intriguing. Lots of, I think, the focus, apart from Friday's V10 engine meeting, which kind of dominated the agenda for a little bit, but then quickly faded away because it was something that we said wasn't going to happen, and in the end they decided it wasn't going to happen yet. But then the focus has kind of primarily been on the on-track battle, really, the McLaren. I think a lot of people were expecting it to absolutely disappear into the distance, and people were talking about 50-second wins, and was Piastri going to lap everybody today, all that sort of thing. So it didn't turn out that way, but at least it wasn't the procession we had in Japan. At least there's some decent stories and a few kind of furrowed brows down the pit lane. We can talk about that later.
Exactly, that's what we like to discuss. And Mark Hughes, we'll come to you next. You've been following this from your bunker in the UK. So even though this is the first time I've seen you digitally this weekend. So always an interesting one, Bahrain. Stark contrast to what we saw at Suzuka, wasn't it, in terms of the track conditions and tyres and all that, almost at the opposite end of the spectrum.
Yeah, demands were completely different, and we saw that reflected in some of the fluctuating form of certain teams and drivers between the two venues. But I think there's a little bit of disappointment in that we all came here after the very, very static race we had in Suzuka, thinking, okay, well, it's going to be a two-stop race. There's going to be a lot of tied deck. There's going to be variations in strategy. So at least we'll get some, more on-track action. And at the front, Oscar Piastri just sort of ran away with it from pole, didn't he? So if Oscar hadn't been there, it would have been a good race because there were some good battles behind. But it's quite interesting that the track layouts are having a more profound impact even than previous seasons on the form between the teams. But the one constant is that McLaren's always there.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case, and they really should have won every single race so far, to be honest. Now, Jon briefly mentioned engines. We're not going to talk about that on this podcast. It's broadly in line with what we talked about in our midweek podcast ahead of this race in terms of the outcome, but basically speaking, nothing's going to change before 29 at the earliest. Could be later than that. We are going to go to simpler engines, perhaps certainly with a lower hybrid element. If you want to find out a little bit more about that, we did a video on that on Friday after the big meeting. So if you go to YouTube and search for our video on F1 makes key 2026 changes and future engine plans, you'll find out a little bit more about it. And I'm sure we'll talk about it on a podcast shortly, but that's on a long timeline. But I just wanted to mention to everyone there was plenty about that. But this is all about the race itself. And accordingly, Mark, how did the race play out?
It played out with Oscar Piastri just disappearing, really. He was always well out of reach of the second place car, which was usually George Russell. He just built up enough of a gap as required to, first of all, get out of the DRS reach, and second, to build a bit of a safety car margin, and thirdly, to be able to give a little bit of strategic flexibility if in the event of an undercut threat upon him. So once he'd ticked off all those boxes, he went only as quick as need be, and then had a little bit of a concern upon the restart because he was doing the restart on mediums and George Russell behind him was on softs, and he was obviously a little concerned that George might be trying to make maximum use of that in the first couple of corners, but as it turned out, that sort of dissolved away. And yes, so really you won by, I think, 16 seconds after running for the last 20 laps from the restart. So not really a contest for the victory. And he was only aided in his cause by the various dramas suffered by his teammate Lando Norris.
Yeah, we're going to get into those ones in a minute. Obviously, as you said, George Russell ended up being the closest chaser. We'll get a bit more onto him shortly with the problems he had. It was a sort of controlled performance, I think it's fair to say, from Piastri, but the kind of thing he needs to do if he's to win this World Championship, which was already on before today, but is even more on if you want to look at it that way. But let's talk, Jon, about Norris versus Piastri. Piastri was imperious, took pole, dominant victory. Lando Norris, not only was he struggling more, had that 5-second penalty for the out of position start, but was doing a lot of self-flagellation, for want of a better phrase, really, wasn't he? Both after qualifying, called himself clueless, and after the race, there was a lot of soul-searching going on about the results he got, which is unusual for a championship contender. So what did we learn about Lando Norris, and why couldn't he get to Piastri's level?
Yeah, I think it's been a weekend of huge contrast between the approaches of Lando and the approach of Oscar. Andrea Stella talked yesterday, but this was mainly in reference to Lando and this. He's hugely, I'm clueless, I need a big reset. So he's talking about this is the way Lando approaches himself, and the problems aren't as big as he makes out. But he talked about Piastri being a driver with basically no noise in his head, that just gets on with the job, very calm, very controlled. And that's exactly what we saw today. It was, almost drama-free from Piastri. And if it wasn't for the safety car, pretty much unchallenged throughout. Whereas Lando, this was a, day of drama, making everything really difficult for himself. Formed up on the grid. I think he stopped slightly short of the line. Then he thought he would actually move a little bit closer because the start was going to be critical to try to clear some cars. But as he kind of lifted or let the clutch out and accelerated forward a bit to stop, he went too far, rolled over the line. That earned him a 5-second penalty, which pretty much cost him second place, because without that, he would have been on the back of George fairly early on in the first stint, probably done the undercut, would have been enough to get George then. and would have been on based on the pace of the car. So it cost him points today, but it has been a weekend where, again, Lando's just made things more difficult than they need to be. Qualifying, being too aggressive at turn one, understeer on the way in, on the throttle on the way out, bit of oversteer. The lap got away from him. Then in the race with the start, then the overtake late on, and potentially you could argue, should he have waited a bit for George Russell on that final lap to try to get past him? Potentially, because once he got squeezed out at turn one, there was no real recovery. So I think it's a weekend where Lando is going to have to sit down afterwards and reflect, both for himself and maybe reflect with the team, and try and work out what he needs to do just to stabilise the situation.
Yeah, it was an interesting mixed bag, wasn't it, Mark? I don't know about you, but I had that same concern on the last lap when Norris attacked on the outside. I thought it would be better if he'd kind of let Russell defend, compromised his run-up exit and run up to turn 4 and maybe attack there. But it's easy to say that when on the outside. But we saw a number of times when Norris didn't get it right in battle. A few times when he really did. There were a couple of times when at turn 4 he kind of was on the outside and sort of cut across the sort of front wing of the Ferrari in a good way. So measured that really well. So there was some good in this race, and there were times when I thought even after the penalty he should be able to get up to second. So I wouldn't say it's been a complete catastrophe, even though the results pretty dire. But what did you make of his all-round performance?
It was scrappy, I think, is probably the best way of putting it. It's a long, long way from his own potential. And he's talking about how in this car he's just not feeling it the way he felt last year. It's not intuitive for him in the way that last year's car was, and he's not understanding why. And it's becoming a bigger and bigger thing in his head the more it happens. And there's two components to it. There's one is just how he's feeling the car, the physical sensations he's feeling in this car compared to how he's felt last year's car, or maybe it's the tyres, the stiffer construction tyres that we have for this year. It could be something as simple as that. And the other component is how he's dealing mentally with that. And as you say, I think it was a good term of self-flagellation. He talked about it extensively to anyone who asked, it seemed, after the race. And he points out, well, this is just how, it's just how I've always operated. I've always criticised myself in this way. And it doesn't have a particularly damaging effect on me. And it's an odd way of looking at it for an elite athlete, but he is very, very gifted, and there wouldn't be that much of a surprise if he just turns up at the next race and completely dominates it. It's that sort of mercurial sort of type of performance that he's capable of, but yeah, he's not in a good headspace at the moment, and I think the fact that Piastri is so fuss free and just delivering so efficiently is probably just piling on that pressure to Norris. So yeah, that's all part of the game. It's all part of the competition, and they're the demands that something like this makes of you when you're in a competitive car and running at the front all the time.
Yeah, and I imagine Oscar Piastri will be rubbing his hands with how things have gone. Obviously, the China win was significant, but just the nature of this one with his performance compared to Norris, I think will feel like a more significant blow, and it is in terms of points, but also at the same time, Lando Norris does still lead the World Championship, so things will change and things will go back and forth, and it's down to, I guess, how Norris bounces back from this. But this is what we've been expecting. This is what we've been hoping for, really, isn't it, John? Because at the moment, it looks like a McLaren driver should win the World Championship. Long way to go. Lots can change. Verstappen still hanging in there. But we wanted to see that Piastri could be there week in, week out. We wanted to see Norris tested, to see how his robustness was, how he was dealing with things. And that's exactly what's playing out, isn't it? Yeah,
we've got the reset now. Obviously, Australia, Piastri lost an awful lot of points with that off onto the grass and has come from behind. Now they're, not equal, but pretty close to each other. So we kind of the championship starts from here. I think in Norris's favour is the fact the only time they have raced properly wheel to wheel so far in Australia, it was Piastri, who came off worst with the bigger of the mistakes. Obviously in China, Piastri was in front and Lando had a bit more of a difficult weekend, but Lando was biding his time for the closing stint before the brake problems, so we didn't really see that battle play out. In Japan, the pair of them were in close formation. Lando had the edge. Here, obviously, has played out with this scrappy weekend. And I think Mark is right that we can turn up in Saudi next weekend. And I think Lando has this ability just to get on it. And I think the margins aren't massive. I think maybe potentially his tyre temps had been a bit better at the front on turn one yesterday. Would that have dialed out the understeer better? Would he then not have been so aggressive, feeling the need to be so aggressive with the oversteer? Does that then make that run up to turn four better? At the very least, that would have got him on the front row. Then does he not make the mistake at turn 6 and lose more time, which dropped him further back, and actually he gets pole position? So I think the margins are very small, but when things are this tight, both between the two McLarens and with especially Mercedes close behind and Ferrari, these small margins can make a big difference, because the McLarens are ahead, but they're not in this kind of different league of being 1 second a lap quicker than everybody else.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. One thing I do want to remind everybody of, because actually it's just playing on the screen at the moment, the move Norris did on Leclerc around the outside at turn 4, I thought was pretty well executed, the legal one, that is, because I thought he'd maybe overcommitted a bit. But there were some good moments in battle from Norris, but yeah, it was scrappy overall. I would say as a footnote, I'm not sure Jeddah is the place he'd be most excited about going to kind of exercise the demons of here. Because if you remember, in 23 and 24, Piastri was marginally the better McLaren driver at that track, so perhaps not the ideal place, but could be a complete reset. But Mark, let's talk about George Russell, because as he's done more often than not this season, he pretty much got the most he could have done out of the car. He had that second place that he had control of all race, and he held on to that second place despite all manner of problems setting in later on. It wasn't just the DRS problem that led to the investigation that he wasn't penalised for, because you can't really penalise someone for pressing the radio button and it opening the DRS, which seems to have been what's happened owing to the electrical haywire. But how impressed were you with what he did, and what was the extent of those problems he was battling? Because he had the brake-by-wire problems and all sorts he was having to carry.
I thought it was terrific this weekend, and he's had a brilliant start to the season. And it really looks as if he's responded to the responsibility of being a team leader and really stepped up that confidence and the way he just the way he's carrying himself, the way he's conducting himself in the car and out. And he has the air of someone who knows he will deliver every time he gets in the car, and it does look very impressive. But that second place was a great overachievement, not only because of Lando's underachievement, if you see what I mean. It was also to do with just what a brilliant pressure drive that was when there were so many distractions coming at him. So first of all, he's been forced onto the soft tyre with really too long a stint to do on the soft tyre, just because of the timing of the safety car, and because that's all they had left. The hard was too slow, and they had no mediums left, so they had to be on the soft. So straight away, he's on the back foot. He's trying to eke out the performance of a tyre that's really been taken beyond its range, and trying to fend off a McLaren on the correct tyre, on the medium tyre. So that's difficult enough challenge anyway. But then on top of that, everything starts going haywire in the control systems. So he's lost the brake by wire. He's having to reset it several times per lap. He doesn't know going into a corner if he's going to have a normal hard brake pedal or a pedal that's going almost to the floor. He's lost dash information. He's got the automatic arming of the DRS is no longer there. So he's got that as a distraction. And yeah, he didn't put a foot wrong, and his defensive drive was brilliant. And I think he's just, he's doing everything right. He's very quick. He's not making errors. He's leading the team. I think he's just generally showing that he is a truly elite driver.
Yeah, he has had a really impressive season so far. We should mention Kimi Antonelli here, who ended up finishing 11th. He was a little bit unlucky, wasn't he, Mark? Because obviously he was forced onto the softs quite early, but the safety car didn't really help his cause in terms of the result, and he would have had a decent result but for that. So a little bit of bad luck, a little bit of learning experience of how you have to manage the tyres in an extreme tyre management situation, I guess, is the story for Antonelli.
Yeah, I mean, Bahrain is, as you say, it's one of the most extreme tyre management races of the season. And he's gone off pretty hard in the start of the race. And really, they've had to convert him to a 3-stop because he was so hard on the tyres. And it's not the ideal strategy, but it would sort of have worked. It would have got him, in the lower end of the points, except for the safety car, which came out just 5 laps after he'd stopped, so he had to stop again. It just didn't come together. There were moments of real promise. He was pretty quick in qualifying. He's potentially even quicker, but just sort of, he got that track limits violation on his first Q3 run, so had to be conservative on his second one. Just a fairly inexperienced driver, still filling in the data banks, but he's got some exciting races ahead of him even this year. So keep the faith.
We'll get back to our chat in a moment, but first I wanted to speak to you about our partner for this episode, the Singapore Grand Prix. As I've said before on this podcast, I've been to all but 2 editions of the Singapore Grand Prix since the original F1 night race joined the calendar in 2008, so I can vouch for it being one of the standout races to attend. Actually, one of the things I really like about the Singapore Grand Prix is how unpredictable it is. Now, the Marina Bay circuit is arguably the most challenging on the calendar, and that inevitably leads to eventful and exciting races. In fact, all but one of the 15 editions of the race to date have featured at least one safety car deployment. So if you'd like to experience unpredictable racing in one of the world's most spectacular cities, plus unbeatable off-track entertainment and hundreds of incredible dining options, why not consider a trip to the Formula One Singapore Airlines Singapore Grand Prix 2025. Single and 3-day tickets for this year's race are available now. Just head to singaporegp.sg to make your selection. It's sure to be a turbocharged weekend, so you won't regret it.
How can you grow your business from idea to industry leader? Bring your vision to life with smart business buying tools and technology from Amazon Business. From fast, free shipping to in-depth buying insights and automated purchase approvals, we deliver everything you need to achieve your goals. It's not easy to stand out from the crowd. Simplify how you stock up to get ahead. Go to amazonbusiness.com for support.
TaxAct knows small business owners can sometimes use a little help with their taxes. That's why TaxAct has Expert Assist, a team of live tax experts ready to answer any questions you may have. Think of them as your own personal sidekick. Not like one of those funny talking animal sidekicks, more like the super smart nerding out on tax code and business casual attire sidekick, but just as helpful and lovable. TaxAct. Let's get them over with.
This episode is brought to you by Principles. Are there limits to the U.S. government's debt growth? What will happen if the debts are not curtailed? What should policymakers or investors do? Those are urgent questions that legendary investor and New York Times bestselling author Ray Dalio addresses in his new book, How Countries Go Broke: The Big Cycle. The book comes out in June and is available for pre-order today, wherever books are sold.
John, let's talk Ferrari now. Once again, it was a case of Charles Leclerc pretty good, Lewis Hamilton not so good, but better than it looked after qualifying, I think you could say, as he came through to finish in fifth place, rather, ahead of Max Verstappen. So, upgraded floor for that car. Progress for Ferrari, or more of the same?
I think there's progress, but I think they've hit the ceiling of performance of this car. I spoke to Charles after the race because it initially looked he was on an slightly offset strategy from everybody else, which gave them the benefit of fresher tyres for the second stint. He kind of tagged himself onto the back of Russell, and looked like if he could kind of break through, you think, well, maybe he can pull off a strategy here and get up. And is the Ferrari actually a dark horse here to do something more spectacular. But they didn't have another medium left, so I had to go for the hard at the safety car, and then the kind of pace fell away. I spoke to Charles afterwards and thought he might be quite pleased with that performance, but he wasn't. He felt that the tyre offset flattered their performance, that they're simply not quick enough. The car's lacking pace. It's nowhere near a match for the McLaren. And I think considering the high hopes they had coming into the season, that they'd made the step, that they could carry on the momentum at the end of last year, where it was pretty much a match for McLaren pending, track characteristics. Some were suiting the Ferrari, some were suiting the McLaren. It's not happened. They've dropped back a bit. They don't have the, brilliant tyre management of the McLaren. It's not quick enough. It needs improvements. I asked Charles, so when are these improvements coming? And his message principally was not soon enough.
Yeah, ultimately, for all the positive noises, some of them try and make it Ferrari. It's not looking like a car that's going to win a race on merit anytime soon. And Mark, what did you make of Lewis Hamilton overall? As I said, decent race drive, but he was struggling and quite down after qualifying. Looks like he's struggling perhaps with the rear stability in the fast corners, which has been a problem in the past few years for him. But as well as them trying to make some progress with the car, and with Charles Leclerc seeming to make some good progress, Lewis Hamilton not perhaps quite so content with that process of getting the most out of what they've got, even if what they've got isn't enough.
Yeah, he's struggling. There's several things going on, and it's difficult to sort of decouple, and understand what the order of importance is. But certainly one of the things is that he's trying to have a setup on the car which he thinks will work with his own driving style, which is always been to brake late into the corner and be quite bold with the initial turn-in speed, and for that he needs the rear to be very stable, and it's just not got that. This car has just absolutely not got that. So he's doing something with the setup which is trying to induce that as much as he can, but Leclerc's not bothering with that. He's going along with it and going more extreme with it, and getting the rotation in the corner by having the car loose like that, and it's working for Leclerc, but it's in over a qualifying lap, but it's not the way to have a car which is going to be good over a race stint. It's going to be good on its tyres, especially a track around Bahrain. And like as Leclerc said, he said, its problems are masked when you put a new set of tyres on. But he said as soon as the tyres are old, it's all over the place, and that's exactly how it looked. Its balance is not really consistent between one type of corner and the other. You could see it understeering in some places and oversteering in others. It doesn't. It seems to be a bit on a knife edge. So, yeah, it's not a car that's in its current form. Lewis is able to drive very well, and it's got a set of demands of in terms of setup, which Lewis is struggling to get his head around. And as he said afterwards, he said, for years been on Brembo brakes, and now I'm on Carbon Industry brakes. He said they're running it with a level of engine braking which way beyond anything I've ever used before. There's so much to get my head around, and he said, and I'm trying to sort of go my own way through the weekend to try and get in a better place. He said, well, if you look at what Charles is doing, he's picking his setup at the beginning of the weekend, he's staying with it and just adapting himself to it. And he said, I'm beginning to get my head around it, and I'm beginning to understand that might be the better way to be progressing. So we'll see. But having said that, Jeddah's in the last few years has not been a track at which he has shone, and particularly through those fast interconnected kinks in the first sector, you really, really need the confidence in the rear end of the car. But yep, early days, and as you say, he did do a decent race stint. Once the safety car had put him on the tail of Leclerc, he was able to pretty much match him. So not disastrous in the race, but 6/10 off in qualifying. So he was pretty much lost for answers after that. But he'd started to make sense of it by the end of the race.
I'll just quickly pick you up on a late night inversion of words there. The Brexits. He was on Carbon Industry before and now on Brembo with
Brembo,
Ferrari.
sorry.
I think you did a late night slip of the tongue there, which is very, very easily done. I imagine I noticed one, and between us we'll probably perpetrate about 30 others that we don't notice. It is quite late in the day here, so we try to avoid those. But let's move on to Red Bull now. As you said, John, Max Verstappen finished 6th. He had to pass Pierre Gasly on the last lap to get up to that. He spent a bit too much of the race messing about with people he probably would rather not be battling with, Carlos Sainz, Esteban Ocon. So why was the Red Bull Max Verstappen combination that won a week ago and also ran here?
Yeah, spoke to Max Verstappen in the pen. His basic summary of the race was everything that could go wrong did go wrong. Basically, he was struggling with brake problems all weekend. Hampered him in qualifying, it hampered him in the race. It was the trigger for a lot of the kind of radio communication in the race, some of the strong comments. He's been struggling with the balance. We know this RB21 has got a continuation of the problem of its predecessor of this kind of through corner balance problem, the disconnect between the front axle and the rear axle, the oversteer on the entry corners, the understeer on the way out, and the transition and the kind of the gradations of that, which then feeds into the balance problems feed into overheating the tyres. So then the tyre temps go up, the performance drops off, the balance gets worse, and you end up in this spiral. Then you compound all those problems on top of the fact that Bahrain is one of the hottest tracks of the season. It's been very hot this weekend, so the tyres are more sensitive. You've got brake problems, locking up much easier. Then you throw on top of the balance problems, and then just in case Max's evening wasn't miserable enough, Red Bull has some worrying problems on their pit gantry. So he had a slow first stop where the traffic light stayed red, holding him, it didn't turn green. And then his second stop, once it switched to a manual exit, the right front wheel gun didn't engage first time. So I think it was a 6.2 second stop. So it was a day where he wasn't very happy.
Yeah, understandably so. Did a pretty good job to salvage that 6th place. And I guess, Mark, what we've seen here is Suzuka was perhaps at the favourable end of the spectrum for Red Bull, where the way the car worked and Verstappen's virtuosity, along with McLaren underachieving a bit, meant that winning from pole was possible. Whereas here, Verstappen driving very well again couldn't do anything like that. So this is probably the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of exposing those weaknesses of Red Bull.
Yeah, I mean, any track which imposes a relatively gentle tyre deck demand on the car, which Suzuka did at its resurfaced form, will allow the Red Bull to not be punished. And anything which, a circuit like Bahrain, which is very heavy on tyre deck, will increase massively the gap between a McLaren and a Red Bull. And it's basically, it's just nowhere near good enough on its tyres to be competitive at a track like Bahrain, where if you go to a gentle place, its aero is good enough and Max is good enough to sort of mask that, especially on a fresh set of tyres.
And Yuki Tsunoda, of course, finished 9th from 10th on the grid. We've got a question about Tsunoda in the final part, so we'll talk about him a little bit there. But he's opened his Red Bull Racing scorebook, which will be good news for him. Let's move on now, though, to Pierre Gasly and Alpine, John. We were expecting, after pre-season testing, for Alpine to be potentially vying to be the lead midfielder. It hasn't been that up until now, when Pierre Gasly, he has won the Class B, as I like to sometimes call it. So where's that pace come from? What does it tell us about Alpine?
Yeah, it's been fascinating because we left the test here. I think we put Alpine 5th or 6th overall.
We had them 6th, but vying with Williams for best of the
very, very close. All looked very strong. Turn up in Australia. The pace was there initially in Australia. Didn't seem terrible. Didn't click in the race. Didn't get any points. Then, whatever the reasons in China, whether it was the long straights, whether it was the rear wing mini DRS clampdown, whether it was the characteristics of the track, but they were off the pace in China, not much better in Japan last weekend. So it seemed this was going to be a really, really tough season. But we've seen flashes of the car being quite quick in some of the high-speed corners, medium-speed corners, and it's come alive this weekend. I think
on traction as well this weekend.
They found something with the way this car works. It got into a good window. Pierre's driven brilliantly all weekend, and I think it's a big boost for them. But potentially they may have, this may be something, and I mentioned this to Oliver Oakes, team principal tonight, maybe they're the opposite of Red Bull in that when the car needs to look after its tyres or manage them potentially, and there's high degradation, maybe this car is quite good at it. Decent downforce levels. So potentially it could be strong on these races with high deg where they need to look after the tyres, and not so strong in those races that are more flat out where the Red Bull is much better.
Yeah, and Gasly, we know what he can do in terms of if you give him the car that works well and is competitive, he can put it up there and do a great job. And he almost held off Verstappen, just ran out of tyres at the end. And it did, Mark, look like for a spell we might have both Alpines in the points because Jack Doohan was running up in the top 10 for quite a while. But it's one of those races that's unravelled somewhat because he struggled in that final stint increasingly on the hards. He got shuffled back. He got a 5-second penalty for track limits. So didn't quite come together for Jack Doohan, which has kind of been the story of his season, hasn't it? A bit of promise, but never quite come together for a complete weekend.
It has, yeah. I'm sure it will be. It will do soon. But he was unlucky with the safety car timing, like a few others. It just came out 4 laps after he just made his stop, so he couldn't get the others around him got the advantage of the 10-second saving. So that sort of pushed him down and meant that he had to. He was on the hard tyre. Which was just not a very good tyre, and a lot of the cars around him were on the mediums. So yeah, it just didn't quite work for him. But as you say, there were flashes of real speed there at various stages of the weekend.
Yeah, I think a total of 14 drivers benefited from the safety car in terms of being able to stop. A few others, or at least a few. You weren't guaranteed to hit problems and lose out massively if you didn't hit the safety car, but it wasn't ideal for some. But let's talk now about Haas. Bizarre weekend for Haas in many ways, wasn't it, John? Because Esteban Ocon stuffed it heavily on his first Q2 flyer. He was quite apologetic about that. Ollie Behrman had a nightmare qualifying, just said he regretted giving up FP1. It was his choice, incidentally. Just couldn't get any confidence in the car, so he was at the back. And then at the end of the race, there's Esteban Ocon 8th, Ollie Behrman 10th.
Yeah, I remember sitting in that early middle phase of the race, and we saw Ocon was up there with the kind of the top end of the midfield into the top 10, and I looked at you and thought, because initially you think when someone's out of position like that, you think, oh, they must have not stopped, and that's why they're so high up the orders. Then you check out the number of pit stops, and you realise he had stopped, and this was a kind of almost genuine position.
He was the first kind of points threat car to stop, I think, on lap 8. So that undercut was great.
7 or 8, and that basically was the foundation of the charge forward. So they went for the super early undercut, jumped loads of cars, and the car pace was there. Esteban had got it into a decent window. I think he felt a bit guilty after giving the mechanics all the work overnight. He pushed forwards. Great performance from Haas. I think they've now moved up to 5th place in the constructors, which is remarkable considering the state they were in after Australia. And then Ollie Behrman had a brilliant first lap, charging forwards, made some steady progress, was helped out a bit with the safety car. I think came out in 12th place, and then I think he got involved in a battle that he described as war. So it was like the karting days, as everyone was banging wheels and overtaking and defending like complete nutters. And in the end, came home, grabbed a point, so was pretty chuffed with that. So I think Haas will be very, very pleased with this performance.
And also a good example of how this race was fairly interesting strategically, because Ocon and Behrman did different strategies. Ocon went soft, medium, hard. Behrman went soft, hard, soft. So it showed there were different options you could take. But yeah, Haas had done a really good job and banked some valuable points. Mark, do you remember when we did our live shows and we voted for who should be the provisional new occupants of Valtteri Bottas Sympathy Corner, and it went to Carlos Sainz. Yeah. And it was funny, isn't it? Because it was looking like things had come together nicely, because he'd actually been very quick in qualifying in Suzuka relative to Albon slightly slower, but like half a tenth off, and then the race didn't go well. And then here you thought he's qualified well. Albon was a bit unfortunate in terms of getting caught out by the queue, and tyre prep was awful. So he was very unlucky in qualifying, not to mention the fact he made Q2, but didn't know he'd made Q2 until Q3 was 6 minutes old. We'll talk about that later. But Sainz, early in the race, you were thinking, well, this is looking good because he ran up in seventh place early on, sixth place even early on, ahead of Antonelli briefly. But it just unravelled, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. And as he said, he was like using his DRS to stay with faster cars, which was working for a while. It was looking really good. But he said then the tyre deg just hit, and it really, really did hit hard. And he started to slide down, and he was getting involved in quite a few little scrappy incidents as he tried to defend, against cars whose tyres were still in good shape. And then in one of those dices, Yuki Tsunoda had a mid-corner snap just as Sainz was alongside him, and put the Red Bull's rear wheel into the side pod of the Williams, and that was that really. And it's just he was always in the wrong place at the wrong time, it seemed, once he got those first few laps out of the way.
The one thing that did go right for him in the end is he was actually briefly given a 3-place grid penalty for the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, wasn't he, John? Only for a few minutes. So what was that all about? People may have missed this.
Yeah, so Carlos picked up a 10-second penalty, and the car was going to be retired. And the rules state that if you don't serve a penalty in a race, then you have to take a grid penalty at the next race. The teams are quite mindful of this, and the normal procedure is you come into the pits, you will, even if you're going to retire, you'll do like a mock pit stop, for example, and let the car sit there and wait, and then put it into the garage. But Carlos did this lap 4, so came in, did his 10 seconds, left the pits, did another lap, came back in and retired. And the FIA, I think it's new for this year, has got a system where when penalties are served, so like we saw Lando Norris's 5-second penalty for the jump start, it gets logged on the timing data system. We get to see it in the media centre. The stewards get to see it, and it says penalty served. For some reason, so some system error, that didn't get logged for Carlos's stop. So end of the race, when he's retired, stewards' system suggests that he's not served the penalty, hands him the 3-second penalty. I think Williams are then scratching their heads going, what's going on here? It's looked at. Stewards realise they've made a mistake because he did actually serve it, and then it's rescinded. So the one thing that has gone his way this weekend, but I'm not sure it's the best thing that he wanted to happen.
Yeah, it's at least avoided a painful postscript. Let's put it that way. But quite difficult weekend for Williams. The car could be quick, but quite tricky to access that speed. Trickier certainly than it was in testing, and the higher temperatures seem to make life quite difficult and exposed. A bit of a balance limitation they weren't so familiar with. So tricky one for them.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Commercial Insurance. Business owners, meet Progressive Insurance. They make it easy to get discounts on commercial auto insurance and find coverages to grow with your business. Quote in as little as 6 minutes at progressivecommercial.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company. Coverage provided and serviced by affiliated and third-party insurers. Discounts and coverage selections not available in all states or situations.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon Business. How can you free up your team from time-consuming office tasks? Amazon Business empowers leaders to not only streamline purchasing, but better support their teams so they can focus on strategy and growth. Free up your teams and focus on your future. Learn more about the technology, insights, and support available at amazonbusiness.com.
Oh my God, it's the coolest thing ever. Hey guys, have you heard of Goldbelly? Well, check this out. It's this amazing site where they ship the most iconic famous foods from restaurants across the country, anywhere nationwide. I've never found a more perfect gift than food. They ship Chicago deep dish pizza, New York bagels, Maine lobster rolls, and even Ina Garten's famous cakes. Seriously. So if you're looking for a gift for the food lover in your life, head to goldbelly.com and get 20% off your first order with promo code GIFT.
Right, well, as always, part 3 of our race review podcast is dedicated to questions from the Race Members Club. If you're interested in joining, click the link in the episode description or head to Patreon and search for the race. Loads of extra bonus content, including you even sometimes get to listen to, as me and Jon did on Saturday night when we were driving back to the hotel. We had a little impromptu sort of semi-podcast that went out on Patreon to members, where not only did we talk about goings-on from the day, but there was a bit of commentary on the regular road driving here in Bahrain, which got swervy at times.
And it helped us miss our junction, so we had to go the long way around to our hotel.
Yeah, absolutely. I never miss junctions unless recording some audio. That's my excuse, and I'm going to stick by it. But anyway, let's delve into some questions now, and thanks to everybody who sent them in. We'll take some more of these later in the week as well. Right, Mark, a question from various questioners: Matt Sykes, Chris Parrott, Michael Sanderson, Jack Lunn, Dan Clark, Nicholas Langdon, all asked versions of, is Oscar Piastri now the World Championship favourite?
Well, yeah, in this sort of snapshot of this moment in time, yes, he is. He's the man in form, and Lando's got a bit of a confidence crisis going on, but these things change quickly, and it's only round 4. But yeah, if you had to say who is the favourite at the moment, yes, it's clearly Oscar.
But I think if you were setting the odds, you'd keep it very, very close, even if you did go with Piastri as favourite. Jon, a question from James Thornley. Why did the FIA fail to see Nico Hülkenberg's Q1 track limits violation? Small but important details like that can have huge consequences for both championships.
Yeah, they got it wrong. It was a mistake, and I mean, luckily this wasn't a World Championship decider, and this was the sort of error that knocked out a title contender and had huge ramifications. 'Cause I really don't know what the solution would have been or response would have been if it had have happened, but it's a simple explanation. So the various corners that the FIA feel there will be track limits problems. So Bahrain, for example, especially turn 4, there's extra monitoring in place, cameras, even people at the side of the track, the computer systems with lines to measure where the cars are, but use of AI as well to judge when cars are well over. And then you've got the Race Operations Centre in Geneva that can help to look at track limits. So these are all done for the main corners. But turn 11 here wasn't deemed one of their hotspots, as they're called. Hülkenberg slightly ran wide there. It wasn't picked up automatically. Aston Martin did pick it up at the time. Asked race control about it, which then prompted race control the need to then get someone to look at it. They went through it, they found the video, confirmed that Hülkenberg had gone over, but this was 40 minutes later, so Hülkenberg had already got through to Q2. So this is how it played out over Q3. So it was a mistake. It's something the FIA will learn from. I'm sure they'll put systems in place. And I'm not sure if there's a limit on how many hotspots they can have on a track. But you can guarantee for next season, turn 11 will be one of their hotspots.
And to the FIA's credit, they did kind of fess up to it properly afterwards and explain it. There are times when the FIA doesn't do that quite as thoroughly as we'd like, but fair play to them on that. They've been very, very clear. They said, yeah, this is what happened. We probably should have been watching. We weren't.
Yeah, I think it was a noticeable stance change, because there were some things last season where the FIA would try to explain things and you'd kind of be scratching your head thinking that's not really a proper explanation. I think like Qatar last year with the debris on the track, and the explanations weren't very robust and thorough there, but they were pretty open yesterday. And I think it's quite rare for a governing body to, give a official statement that says we got it wrong. So yeah, hats off to the FIA for that one.
Next question comes from Ben Clarkson. I'll take, which of the 6 FP1 drivers impressed the most during the Bahrain weekend? Which has the best shot of making it into F1 in the next year or two? Yes, well, with the caveat that I am basing this primarily on watching trackside in FP1, which I did at turn 9-10, and also FP1 was one of the lowest grip dry sessions you could ever hope to see. There were cars all over the shop. The driver that impressed me most was Dino Beganovic in the Ferrari. He was in Charles Leclerc's car. Now, I do have to say that he was obviously a pretty inexperienced one, so it's easier for him, I think, to catch the eye, simply because if you've got someone like Felipe Drugovich, say, in the Aston Martin, he's done quite a bit of this, so he sort of... You know what he's going to do, and you kind of have expectations of a decent level. But what I liked about Beganovic is in those horrible conditions, and Lewis Hamilton was getting caught out at times early in the session, Beganovic kind of kept it under control, and crucially he learned, and he adapted, and you could see him experimenting and changing a little bit what he was doing within the realms of doing the program that Ferrari needed him to do. They had some important test work to do across the two cars at that time. And yeah, I just had the impression that Bogdanovic was reasonably well on top of it and doing what was needed and experimenting with the driving where he could. But it's very, very difficult to impress on a level playing field in FP1, let's say, because, for example, Browning in the Williams, he only had basically one performance lap, and he was doing loads of aero work. He was very neat and tidier than Albon, actually, but not the most flattering program. Fred Vesti had quite a few offs at turn 10, but a decent job otherwise. Rio Hirakawa in the Haas doing a good job, and yeah, they're all at a decent level. But Bogdanovic, I watched and I thought, yeah, I can see why Ferrari quite like what they're seeing from him in terms of the simulator work and the TPC stuff he's done. So he's got quite a good rep in Ferrari. Best shot of making it into F1 in the next year or two in a full-time drive. Maybe it's Bogdanovic. I wouldn't say any of the six of them are in a brilliant position to do it, to be honest. So maybe Bogdanovic, not with Ferrari, but perhaps he's a driver who could end up with being placed somewhere that wants a rookie. Maybe even Cadillac, something like that. Who knows? But I wouldn't say any of the six of them have a stunning dead cert chance of getting it. But I'm interested to see how Bogdanovic does. Right, Mark. Jonathan Besant says, do you think we were deprived of an even more interesting end to the race by the safety car?
It would have made it slightly different. It would have made Ferrari's strategy quite interesting. Johnny touched on it earlier. They're doing the 2 stints on the mediums. It really worked well for them going long on the first one. And I think they would potentially have been able to go long enough to get onto the softs for the final stint. And so that might have been interesting. It would have set up a nice little battle, I think, between Leclerc and Russell. But I think generally, yeah, Oscar was, on top of the whole game so well. I don't think it was going to fundamentally change the outcome of change who was going to win the race. But yeah, it would have probably mixed it up a little bit more, I think, because there were a few different strategies that were playing out that we didn't get to see play out and how they would have compared without the safety car. And certainly the timing of the safety car was it really, if you didn't have a new set of mediums to put on, it really did hurt you. So yeah, that was you saw that up and down the field. So yeah, I think it would have been better without the safety car.
John, a question from Anna. Were the stewards too nice with Lando Norris's full start penalty? He made up 3 places due to a full start and gained a massive advantage. Surely it should have been at least a 10-second penalty.
I think 5 was probably about right. He was stationary at the time. If there'd been a ton of momentum, like a proper false start, where he's gaining speed and much quicker than everybody else and had gained because of that, I think that would easily have been a 10-second penalty. If you remember Pastor Maldonado at Spa, that famous year with the Grosjean shunt, when he pretty much decided I'm not going to start at the same place as everybody else and went super early. But Lando didn't do that. He was stationary. I don't think it made all masses and masses and masses of difference to where he would have got to at turn 1. So I think 5 seconds was pretty much right. I think 10 seconds for what he had done there would have been very, very harsh. I think it wasn't indiscretion. It needed punishing, but I don't think it needed an entire race to be wrecked because of it.
The next question I will take from, it's one of those combined questions again from Kieran McDonnell, Stephen Stibe and Matt Tucker. Was the safety car actually required for the debris? Now, I can't really judge the amount of debris because I actually never saw... I saw it coming off the car, scientist car. It was a load of scientist side pod, and there seemed to be quite a lot of it. So I imagine in terms of the amount, it was needed, although I didn't see how much was left on the track, etc. So I'm sure it was needed. And I guess the other part of this is, did it need to be a safety car rather than a virtual safety car? The downside with a virtual safety car is obviously it doesn't condense the field. And if you want to clean up the track and make sure you've not only got the big bits, but all the little bits of carbon fibre as well, it's necessary to create a big gap. So you want to bunch up the field behind the safety car rather than having everyone rolling around spaced out. So that was the reason why they did it. on paper, it seems perfectly reasonable. I can't say with absolute 100% certainty because I didn't see the extent of the cleanup, but it seemed fine to me. And yeah, you want to make sure they get everything up because you don't want people to have punches on debris or anything like that, and you don't want track workers in particular in any danger, because even though VSC speed limits are very slow, they're still pretty quick by normal traffic standards, let's put it that way. Right, question now, Mark, from Kieran Sharkey. What made the hard tyre such a bad race tyre when normally it's stronger? And how was the soft so strong and able to keep decent performance until the end?
It just depends on the particular combination of track layout and track temperature on the day. In the cold temperatures of testing, the hard struggled. And certainly Mercedes, who tried it quite extensively, were convinced it was just not worth using here, even though the temperatures had come up a lot. It's just down to how the combination of the loads that you're putting into it in the circuit layout, the surface of the track, combine to make the tread surface work in unison with the structure of the tyre, the core of the tyre. And there is like an optimum level of sort of vibration that it induces in the tyre to make the tread surface work and the core of the tyre bendy enough to sort of oppose the loads being put on it and trying to pull itself back. So if you don't get that, if you've just missed it, either through the way that the car is loading up the tyre or the way that the track surface isn't allowing that to happen, then that tyre won't work. But it's not really a continuum. It's quite often just like a threshold, and suddenly you'll get to a point where it'll start to work, and then it'll switch on. So these things aren't set in stone. You can't say the hard is usually better tyre. There's not a usually about it, and it's not an exact science. It's a bit of a black art.
John, a question for you from Mark Riley. Is there any meat on the bone of the stories popping up that had Max's manager and Helmut Marko at each other's throats, and Christian Horner, Pierre Vacher and others in a heated crisis meeting?
Yeah, I've seen the comments and the story about Raymond Vermeulen and Helmut Marko. I wasn't in the pit lane afterwards, so I've not seen it. I can't comment. Therefore, I can't say it definitely happened or what happened or how it happened. So we'll just have to rely on people who did see it. There was definitely a meeting afterwards that involved Christian Horner, Helmut Marko, Pierre Vacher, and Raymond Vermeulen was around in the kind of hut as well. I think some people interpreted it as a crisis meeting. Some people in the team say crisis is probably a bit too much to label their weekend. I think someone suggested it's more of a shambles of a day, basically, with the car not performing, the pit stops, the balance problems, the brake problems, the overheating. I think ultimately the team's not surprised it struggled here. I don't think it anticipated that this weekend was going to be anywhere near like Japan. It's obviously exposed big weaknesses in the car. I think it's obvious Max is probably a little bit frustrated because he's been pushing the team quite hard. There was meetings before Japan as well to discuss everything and give his viewpoint. And I think one of the things that he's been perhaps most frustrated about, and this goes even back to last year, is the team not accepting the scale of the problem they're in. I think sometimes he's done such a good job, it's masked the reality of the situation with the team. So I think it's the team accepting the issues they've got, the team accepting they need to work harder, and I think the team ramping up its efforts to get things sorted, because Red Bull still have a sniff at this championship. If they can nail this balance problem and find the answers and unlock some performance, they're not a million miles away on tracks that suit them, as we saw in Japan. This weekend potentially was going to be the worst we're going to see of the Red Bull, because there's not many super hot races like this with degradation, heavy braking. So maybe the reality of Red Bull's pace is somewhere between Japan and what we saw here today. That's still not good enough. It still needs to be quicker. But I think the mood is very much get their heads down and get this thing sorted as quick as possible.
Next question I will take comes from Justin McIsaac. Is some of the pressure off Yuki Tsunoda, for a week at least, with a decent performance in a car that was clearly having a poor weekend? I don't think the pressure changes much because although Lawson was axed after 2 races, I think Tsunoda was always going to have a longer run than that, whatever happens. So I don't think it's like you've got an okay result today, so you're okay for a few races. I think it will help him to have got that points duck broken. It was quite a tricky weekend, though, for him because he was struggling with the car problems as well. I would say in Suzuka, I was quite optimistic for his chances going into qualifying, having followed him closely in practice. And I thought he'd have made Q3, and I think he actually could have done, but for the tyre prep not going right in Q2. But then here going into qualifying, I was thinking, God, he could fall in Q1 the way it's gone so far this weekend. But he got through to Q3 just by the skin of his teeth ahead of Doohan. But did that, had a decent race, survived that little scrape with Sainz, got the 9th place. So, yeah, I think it'll help Tsunoda's confidence. Obviously, Verstappen wasn't miles away, but there was still a reasonable performance difference. But, yeah, a nice step for Tsunoda, who is grappling with the peculiarities of the car. Mark, a question now for you from Adpo. 2 questions. Did Ferrari mess up in bringing in Leclerc and Hamilton when they did? And was there any hope for a one-stopper? And Chuck Aoki asked a similar question.
No, in hindsight, it didn't work, but that's because of the timing of the safety car. Running long on the medium, starting on the medium and running long on it, and then putting another set of mediums on, potentially allowed you to run long enough to put the softs on and avoiding the hard altogether, which wasn't a quick tyre. Had they been able to do that, I think that would have been the best strategy anyone would have had in the race. As we were saying earlier on, Leclerc said that the strategy was actually flattering the performance of the car up until the moment when they had to switch to the hard because it was too long to go when the safety car came out. So no, they didn't bring him in at the wrong time. Logically, it was a very, very good strategy, and it fell apart with the timing of the safety car. And the other part of the question?
Well, it's basically whether a one-stopper was ever possible, which...
Leclerc
certainly thought it was.
You could have done a one-stop, but you would have had to have used the hard, and you would have just been slow. So, yes, you would get to the end, but you wouldn't have got to the end very quickly. The hard was just not a quick tyre.
Yeah, Leclerc in the pen afterwards was asked about his Delta preference for the one-stop, and he admitted that it wasn't going to work based on... with hindsight and how that hard tyre performed at the end, because it would have just been too slow.
The next question for you, John, from Chirag Shah. Was this a damage limitation weekend for Verstappen, given the Red Bull struggles compounded with the poor stops and safety car timing? Max did great to cross the finish line 6th. Also, it's ironic that Jonathan Wheatley's first official non-Red Bull weekend is when they have the worst pit stops. Coincidence much? It was his second with Sauber, just had, but he was pretty low-key at Suzuka, so I'm not surprised if he wasn't spotted by quite a few people.
Massive damage limitation. I mean, to have come through, the shambles of the weekend with the balance problems, the tyre problems, the brake problems, the pit stop problems, to be pretty upset afterwards and to still be, what is it, 8 points off the championship lead, I think is remarkable. And it's probably a sign of the frustration. If you think he's got more than twice the points of Charles Leclerc at Ferrari, he's got more points than George Russell. So I think what we're seeing from Max is an anger because he knows that this championship's not gone, that there is a sniff of it, that if they can pull their socks up and get these things sorted out quite quickly, then the championships, I think he still believes he can do it and overcome the McLarens with the hope that they take points off each other. And he certainly benefited a little bit from the fact that neither Lando nor Oscar have had this huge head start because Oscar lost those points in Australia. Lando had the scrappy race today, lost a little bit in China. So he's hanging in there. So I think huge damage limitation from the championship perspective. And in terms of Wheatley, losing anybody like that's always going to be a step back. But I don't think you can link his departure to what happened today. Sounds like if it's a worrying issue internally, that's not the sort of thing that a kind of sporting manager would likely have picked up on. But they've quarantined this pit stop gantry. They'll have an investigation. They'll have a look at it, and maybe we'll get an official confirmation on what it was or what it wasn't.
And the final question I'll take comes from Lazy. says, a bit of a cheeky one. Did Flavio Briatore sell an FP1 session to Toyota? Well, this is referencing the fact that Hirakawa was in the Haas, having been in the Alpine for his Suzuka outing. Now, I don't know about any commercial terms. I wouldn't be surprised, knowing Flavio Briatore, if Alpine did make a little bit out of having Hirakawa there. What I do know is that Hirakawa ended up as an Alpine reserve because Toyota had been given the indication there was a better chance of a possible race drive next year than there was with Haas, because Haas said, look, we want you, because they quite like Hirakawa, but we've got R2 signed up for next year as well, so there's no chance of a race drive for Hirakawa in 2026. So they looked around and ended up at Alpine. And then this is all basically changed and reset, and I think Hirakawa only had the guarantee of the FP1 in Suzuka, and basically Toyota decided to move him back because they already have the association with Haas. So exactly what's gone on there, and how much of it is down to the fact that Alpine accumulated quite a few reserve drivers and Franco Colapintos hanging around there, pressuring Jack Doohan for a seat at some point during this season, maybe played a part in that. But yeah, the thing I do know is there was that expectation that it was a realistic step towards a contention for a race seat, but I don't think that was ever really very likely with Alpine. Hence why Hirakawa's back with Haas, and he should get another 3 outings for them this year. Well, thanks very much, Mark and Jon. Thanks to everybody who sent in questions. Now, before we finish up, we've got another giveaway. Once again, we're offering a free month of access to the Race Members Club to the first 50 people who claim it via the link you can find in the description of this episode. So as I always say, act fast to make sure you don't miss out. Well, it's a triple header. We've got part 3 coming up, so stay with us for everything you need to know from the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix.
The Athletic.
As we head into the playoffs, it's safe to assume there will be a few calls made by the refs that will be hard to accept. But you know what isn't hard to accept? Discover. Believe it or not, Discover is accepted at 99% of places that take credit cards nationwide. You heard that right, 99%. So make a good call for your wallet and get Discover. Based on the February 2024 Nielsen report, learn more at discover.com/creditcard.